all grow out of each other. So I'll show you how this works, and it doesn't require any science. It's just a visual that you can see. You can fit a cube and a dodeck together. So you got this 5-sided geometry that's light green, and then you got the 8-sided geometry, or the 4-sided per face, with the cube there. So each cube, if you look at the top, you see it looks like a little rooftop, like a little house. You just put a rooftop on each of the faces of the cube, and you're done. You got a dodeck, just like that. So now we're going to look at, you can see now how those two shapes, cube and dodecahedron, two of the 5, they fit together so beautifully. The tetrahedron fits beautifully inside the cube. And here's how that works. Notice that there's no overlap. All you're doing is you're taking 4 of the 8 corners of the cube and connecting the dots together diagonally across the cube face. And you get that tetrahedron, just like we see it in the chandeliers here. And then you can put 2 of them together, and that makes the Merkaba. And we're going to talk a lot about this in a minute, because this is actually the key to understanding the universe. The Merkaba is everything. Then we can take the octahedron and fit it inside the tetrahedron beautifully by just connecting the dots like we see right here. So that Merkaba has the octahedron inside of it. And then, last but not least, this is the really tricky one, the hardest one to see, is how the icosahedron fits inside the octahedron. This is where you got to kind of do something strange. You can't just bisect the middle now. You got to do it off to the side. So you see now how there's an equilateral triangle on each of the 8 sides of the octahedron, but you'll notice that we're making now this kind of funny triangle inside each face that's sort of offset by what looks like maybe 30 degrees. And you make those offset triangles on each face and then connect the dots, and inside you get this octahedron. So notice also, you can see it here, and you could also see it in the previous illustration, that the geometry tilts. It's like a rotational vortex type of movement. There's a tilt angle on the icosahedron compared to the octa. It goes whoop and goes off to the side. Here's another visualization of it, another way that we can see this. The icosahedron inside the octahedron. So then again, here's that little weird triangle that I said is offset. And the funny part is that you get this classic ratio. And you all are so cool, I don't even need to say it. It's the Fibonacci.
Doorways, megalithic.
I have no words. Apparently, no words. I guess these wireless mics broadcast really well, but since I'm not wireless, we can just mute that wireless mic on the mixing board, and hopefully that will solve the problem, because we're getting interference from somebody else's wireless mic. I think that's what it is, which shows the energy is really good out here. It's broadcasting over quite a long distance. So look, all it is you take the length of the entire side, that's a 1. You take the length of where the sacred cut is, right? And that's a 0.618. That's your Fibonacci, your golden mean. So all of these things that are the regulation of life and growth and development, it's written right into the geometry itself, which that, to me, just really trips me out and is very, very cool. Okay. Now, last but not least, the dodeca and the icosahedron, that's an easy one. Because really, it's just flipping it inside out. You can see it very clearly how well they fit together. There's a pentagonal theme in both. And it works, and it fits, meshes very, very nicely. And we see, in this illustration, just another example of the same thing. So all of them nest together, and they're all fractal, right? So think about this. You can take that same principle of fractals and zooming through things and show how you could zoom through this just by expanding them. Like if you expand the amount of energy that they have, the size that they have, you pump them up, and they twist, and as the lines continue changing, you can ratchet one shape into another. And that's a very, very important point. And here's where it gets even more trippy. All you have to do is use spheres. You take individual spheres that are all the same size, and then you start putting them together, and that's called close packing. So this whole science of close packed spheres, how many spheres can you fit together as tightly as possible? What you're seeing here is the Merkaba made of close packed spheres. All the same geometry I was showing you, it's just a function of spheres. There's another Merkaba made out of spheres. Here's the octahedron made out of spheres, and here's another example. And then what we have is the octahedron with the cube around it, again, all made out of spheres. You add more spheres, and then you get this. Now you got your icosahedron, dodecahedron, and you can invert it. So this actually shows that the universe is building, this is my interpretation, is the universe is building little spheres of energy. And those little spheres pack together, they're attracted to each other, and they form this geometry, and this is the basis of all reality. It fractalizes out. So this comes to us now, this idea that the universe could be built from this stuff is a great scientific, it's part of a great scientific breakthrough that in my view changes everything that we thought we knew. And you've heard me say this before, I'm sure by now. If not, this is going to blow your doors off. But it had to be mentioned. And you're going to hear some new things about it that I discovered only at the last talk. So only if you saw the last talk will this be familiar to you. That was the one I did at Conscious Life Expo. If you haven't seen it, this is going to rock your world. It did for me. So this came out in 2013, and I had basically what you could call a geekgasm when I read this. I start running. I literally wanted to unbuckle my seatbelt as we're climbing in altitude in an airplane and run up and down the aisles, screaming with joy. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. Which probably would have made me learn really quickly where the federal air marshal who's packing a concealed weapon was. And I would be zip-tied, and I would have a very painful flight. And then I'd be all known as the conspiracy theorist who went crazy on the airplane. Why did I want to run up and down? Because of this. Because of what these guys discovered. Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka. This blew me away. Here's what they look like. Two scientists from Caltech. And what they did was to go through and analyze all of the scientific information that's available to them about quantum physics and particles and how particles are formed and what kind of jitters and waves appear in the subatomic level. And scientists have spent so much time analyzing just how two little particles interact with each other. You shoot this particle out of this gun, you shoot this particle out of this gun. Do they come together? Do they fall apart? And how do they interact? And it creates a little squiggly pattern. And there are 90-page long equations for each squiggle. Those are called the Feynman diagrams. And I was on stage with the physicist Nassim Haramein at one point, and he confirmed that the Feynman diagrams are the bane of all physicists. It's just horrible. So if you got to do 90 pages of calculations for each one of these squiggles, and there's thousands of them, you could lose your frickin' mind trying to make sense out of this stuff. But these guys discovered that you can take all of those different diagrams for each squiggle and solve all of them with a single pattern, a single geometric form. Solves all those squiggles beautifully, perfectly, and elegantly. How does this work? The shape itself they called the amplituhedron, and another name for it that's even more outrageous is the positive Grassmannian. That's just an esoteric physics term. Here's what it looks like. But that diagram didn't do very much for me. Now remember, in this case, the geometry is what's really important. The sine waves that you see along each line are meant to illustrate how the geometry, it doesn't just sit there, it's jiggling. But their theory is that the jiggles of the geometry are actually expanding out into the entire frickin' cosmos. Now again, that's kind of hard to visualize, except that I just showed you the fractals, the Mandelbrot set. And I showed you how you can zoom in on that sucker, and no matter how far you go, you keep seeing more and more and more. So this one little guy is jiggling, And it expands and expands and expands and becomes all the stars, all the galaxies, all the planets, and all the life in the entire freaking universe, moment by moment. But the only thing that really exists is this little shape. That's really freaking trippy. And so here's the actual diagram of the underlying geometry that is wiggling and making the whole universe. Now, Sir Roger Penrose in the 1970s got pretty close. This was his idea. He didn't quite nail it, but he got a lot of the math right, and then these guys just came in and basically completed his work, and it actually was a simpler geometric pattern than what Penrose thought it was. It's basically 4 tetrahedrons stuck together, just like these tetrahedrons on the wall. We got 4 on the wall. You could take these down, fit them together, and make that shape. That's all it is. Now, what did I see? Right away, I said, whoa, this is why I wanted to run up and down the aisles. That's just part of the Merkaba. And you fit the whole thing together and you get this. Really? We got to get some air conditioning in here. People are getting crazy. It's gone there. And I still got 2 hours to go. All right. We're having fun. It's all good. So I want to show you how they morph together now. Check this out. So here we start with the original shape that they found. Now we got this guy. So let's look at what happens. You can clearly see that these two shapes grow out of each other, and that the Merkaba is just a larger form. But again, because this shape is so symmetrical, they only needed to find 4 of the tetrahedrons to build the whole pattern that explained all of quantum mechanics. They didn't need to get the whole thing. And because the geometry is fractal, it all worked out. Now, oh, the Tibetan Buddhists, right? That's some ancient skeptic now talking. Oh, that's just some ancient culture. They didn't know anything. What did the Tibetans actually say the universe was made from? That trips me out, because what they're saying is that this shape is the original shape of the universe, and that it expands, and they actually equate that with a sound that they call Aum. They say that the expansion of the original shape makes a humming noise, which wouldn't it do that, right? There's going to be a vibration. There's going to be something happens as this. Sound is just vibration, right? So as that little guy, that little geometry goes, it's vibrating and it's making a sound. And so what they would also teach in their ascension teachings is that if you make the same sound, then you actually, are you filming? Oh no, she's not filming. Okay. Yeah, we don't want filming here. It's just like, I can't keep doing the same talk over and over again and not get caught if it ends up on the internet. No, I always do it different, but it's, I try to keep things a little bit more organized. And anyway, you got in here late, so you didn't hear me say that. It's all good. So, this one is another Buddhist mandala, which trips me out. Why? Because it's got the geometry within geometry in it. And again, what they're saying is there is this shape, that the actual shape for the vowel ah, they make that shape, and it's called a tigli. And so one of the illustrations you see in these ascension diagrams from the Tibetans is the tigli shape, this actual Sanskrit character for ah, with a rainbow around it. And what they teach is that the whole universe is the rainbow that emanated from this original shape. But in other diagrams, they show it as a geometry. So is this just some boring old thing that doesn't mean anything? Or is this the result of extraterrestrials who already knew all the stuff that we're just now learning? And they know that this is the secret to ascension, because if you visualize yourself as the Merkaba, if you start to do that meditation, then you are actually reorienting your mind with your primal identity. The Tibetans taught us that the primal identity must be reaccessed, and it can only be done with meditation. So they tell you that your mind is empty and your mind is aware. Empty awareness. And it's supposed to be something that's the whole universe. So they would teach you, as I said, if you saw my talk in the amphitheater, they would teach you to meditate on like a big, gorgeous mountain view. And imagine that you're projecting your awareness into that view so that your mind now engulfs the entire area that you're looking at. This is why these guys that ascended were in the Himalayas, because they would do this practice as they looked at mountains. It's why I live in the mountains. Same thing. I deliberately do that, even though it takes me frickin' 20 minutes to drive to any type of civilization. It's worth it. Pretty soon I'll be levitating into civilization. So, awareness that is empty, that's what you get when you get in touch with this geometry. They teach you to recognize in meditation that you are the awareness of the universe, that awareness is you. And then you acquire what in the law of one is called personality transparency. Now here's where it gets controversial. The Masonic symbol, the square and compass, oh, wait a minute. It's the same geometry. The seed of the universe. The G means God or geometry. The compass is what you use to draw circles, and the square is what you use to draw straight edges. That's the equipment that you would use to draw the geometry. So this does appear to have come to them from extraterrestrials who already knew what the heck this thing was. Now, unless you saw the talk that I gave on Monday night at Conscious Life Expo, this should be new to you. Was anybody here for the Monday night Conscious Life Expo? I know you were. Anybody else? How many? Okay, not too many. You were there. I remember that. Okay. This is awesome. You guys are going to be excited for this because you're all big fans of this stuff. You've watched everything, read everything. I saw this. It totally tripped me out. What I realized was that these guys who are academically studying this geometric pattern, they never really saw what it was. And it thundered in on my head after I'd done a talk on Saturday at Conscious Life Expo. So there's only like 5 of you in the room who saw that I made this connection. I realized that the geometry of the original thing is a photon, which is so important, right? Because what did I just say about photons? I said that DNA attracts them, that the photon carries the genetic code, and that the photons can actually make DNA molecules out of water. And the photons can rewrite sick tissue into healthy tissue. The photons are the life force that's sucked out of you if somebody is an energy vampire. So this photon, when we hear these ancient esoteric traditions, what do they always say? In the beginning there was the light. The light was the first thing that was created. So this now, we got to look at it as not just some ancient thing, but it's extraterrestrial download. Because their scientists already figured all this stuff out. Now we got to redo the work. So what is that geometry? It's a photon. How do we prove this? We go back to this guy, Dr. Max Planck, who actually studied quantum level and came up with the infamous Planck's constant. And I swear to God, this is the only equation you're going to hear in the talk, except for the ones that were flying at you at the beginning. That's it. So Max Planck's big discovery was that energy is quantized. Energy travels in individual packets. Now, we're going to see that those packets are ultimately the geometry I just showed you. And I'm going to prove that to you. The size of the packets, and the packets, of course, are photons. That's part of the science. So all energy is made of photons. The photons are individual. Up until then, they didn't know if it was a steady stream or if it was individual bursts. Now we know light is a series of individual bursts that are packets. But as you pump them up and you put more energy into them as they're released, they will get larger. And so there's a proportion, there's a set amount of how much they get larger depending on how much energy you pump in. And this suggests that there is a consistent structure underlying the expansion. And this creates a ratio or a constant. So, this is measured, the way that Planck calculated the constant was by looking inside a cube of space and then making an arbitrary measurement of the cube's volume of 10. He just picked a number. There's nothing more to it than that. He just decided it was 10. So that's really important. The volume of the cube is 10. So now watch the magic. The science says that this is the equation. And again, it's a very, very simple equation. This is about as easy as it gets. E is energy, and V is the velocity, E is the energy, the amount of energy you pump in, V is the volume. See, I can't even get a freaking simple variable equation correct. I'm in trouble. V is the frequency. H is Planck's constant. So what it shows is that as the energy pumps up, the packets get larger in size, and they do it by a set proportion. So it's about as simple as you could ever get. That's a geometric relationship. So here's the actual measurement of Planck's constant, 6.626 times 10 to the minus 34. Now, that 6.626 is a dimensionless constant, which means that it stays the same regardless of the size of the packet, and it's all based on 10 being the full volume of the cube. So let's think about that. 6.6 out of 10. That's 2/3 exactly. This is going to become very significant. Now here's, I had to throw this one in. Two great human advances. In 1899, Planck's constant, the proportionality constant between the energy of a photon and the frequency of its wave. 2011, Plancking, the phenomenon of being photographed while lying Planck-like on an object, and subsequent distribution of the image via social media. Just so we can get it clear, you know? Two great human advancements. So this is where it's so trippy. Check this out. The tetrahedron fills exactly 1/3 of the volume of a cube. So if the cube's volume is 10, 1/3 is 3.333. But the Merkaba is 2 tetrahedrons. That's going to fill a total of 2/3 or 6.666. And then when you crank it through Coulomb's equation, it drops down a little bit. And that's just the permittivity of space. But basically, you got Planck's constant being 6.6. So it totally fits. And again, the energy of the vacuum, Coulomb's equation, drops it a little bit. But anyway, check this out. Photons are tetrahedral Merkabas. And I spent years talking to a scientist named Rod Johnson who taught me all this stuff. He'd independently figured this out, and then later figured out that Buckminster Fuller had also concluded that photons were Merkabas because of this. So I didn't make this up. 2 different credentialed scientists independently came up with this. And it's a very, very significant point, because what it shows us is that all these light patterns, the light that we see is the fractal. Now think about what I just said. There's one seed that the whole universe is made from. When I showed you the Mandelbrot set and we're zooming in on that sucker, as we zoom in, what do we keep seeing? Images of the original. If nothing else exists in the universe except for photons, they're all images of the original. The original photon has now been discovered by these scientists who did this totally outrageous math, and the original photon appears in Tibetan Buddhist mandalas from like 1,200 years ago or more. So this obviously is really, really trippy. So here you have the tetrahedron inside the cube, just so you can really, really get this. We know scientifically that's 1/3 the volume of the cube. And when you put the two of them together, the photon, actually what happens is they stretch out like this. So they go face to face. And then as it passes through the cube, it totally moves out through 2/3 of the volume. And this shape that we're looking at right now is the shape that photons look like when they've been studied in the lab. They don't quite get the corners, but this actual shape is what, it's pretty close to what the scientists get because they make it look like this elongated form. It's just the corners in the middle, they don't quite get that yet. So what does this mean? This means that this brand new science, this really exciting thing that these guys figured out, is actually, they discovered the photon. They haven't gone that far. They haven't figured it out yet, that they found the first photon in the universe. But it's the only photon in the universe because everything comes from the light. Wow. See why I got so excited when I figured this out? That amplituhedron is not just any old thing. It's a photon. And that validates all these spiritual teachings that the universe is made of intelligent light. And then the light, the whole basis of the fractalizing of the light is geometry. So if you're not tripping already, you're about to go a lot deeper down the rabbit hole. So what's the first thing that this photon does is it fractalizes? It turns into a sphere. It fractalizes out into a big sphere. And that's the first star of the universe, the primordial sun. It makes itself into that. Then that first star starts to bud off smaller stars and those planets eventually become stars. And eventually it buds and buds and buds and fractalizes out into a super galaxy. That's the big galaxy that we now know is where all the other galaxies in the universe are located in. The universe is not just a big sphere in which there's equal matter distribution all the way through the sphere. It's a flat disk. And the blueprints of this are still visible in the universe. So I'm going to remind you of something here because this really tripped me out. This was one of the discoveries I made a couple months ago. And, I just got so excited. Let's go back to the Merkaba diagram for a minute, okay? Now let's remember that the original photon, the amplituhedron, the Merkaba, the original photon, is this little guy standing up straight so the axis goes up and down like this. Now, so there's one example of it, and you can see that, again, the octahedron hides inside the photon, hides inside the tetrahedron, okay? But notice that there is a tilt that you have to do. I'm just showing you different versions of the same thing. This is the one I wanted. So there's your Merkaba, okay? Let's assume that the top and bottom of the universe, the original top and bottom of the universe, is going to be the top and bottom of the Merkaba, and that the whole universe has been formed from this one little guy. And it just burst. It just exploded and created this massive amount of volume of stars. And those stars are going to be held together by geometric fields because they're resonating in geometric patterns. And that's jumping a little bit ahead. But I want you to check this out first. Now imagine, if you can, that this guy is just bursting out. It's just expanding at an incredible rate of speed. And as it does so, it's shooting off dust because it's creating stuff. Now check out this octahedron here. And imagine that this octahedron is also expanding and creating dust and belching out dust at the same time that the octahedron, that the Merkaba is forming the whole universe. So notice the tilt. Notice the tilt angle. I was so excited when I saw this. Why? Because the universe has an octahedron-shaped dust pattern at the far edges. The dust of that shape is still out there in this so-called supergalaxy. So there's the supergalaxy. Now you don't really see anything yet. But this is where all the galaxies are in the middle. It's a big flat disk. We only see it from the side because we don't have the ability to go up there where we can look down on it. But we know that it's a big galaxy. But then you got all this extra dust that kind of blew off around it on the top and the bottom. This is the entire universe. This is a map of the visible. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. Got 179 IQ points blowing around in my head like a fucking popcorn popper. Okay? Try to keep up with me if you can. Why did I have to drop the F-bomb? Can't I just let go of that? My goodness. It's fun, though. I'm from New York. That's what we do. Okay. So, yeah, this is the map of the universe. This is everything there is based on telescopic observation. Now, if these guys have discovered that the only thing that really exists in the center of the universe is the Merkaba, and the Merkaba went goosh and burst out, and a lot of dust was created as it expanded, oh my God. What we see here is this pattern on the same tilt angle as where the octahedron is inside the Merkaba. And when you wrap this thing around, because remember, this is like a Mercator projection of the Earth's globe, you got to make it into a globe, and what do you get? An octahedron. Holy crap. So this is a visible piece of evidence that when this little guy exploded and created the entire frickin' universe in that moment of creation, that the octahedron inside shot off all this dust. Notice the tilt angle, and I'm going to bring you right back here. It's the same thing. All that dust right now, whatever it is, 18 trillion years later, it's still in the same pattern. So let's take a look now. Think about fractals. What was he saying? What was that dude saying? He was talking about fractals. He was talking about geometry. He said that the geometry fractals too, because he was saying that the different types of geometry are nested inside of each other, and one goes into the other, and I showed you the cube with the dodecahedron and all this stuff, right? So the geometry is always going to be there. The geometry are like the lines of force that hold everything together. They're exerting pressure. Geometry exerts pressure that we would interpret as gravity. There's gravitational pressure that's holding things in a certain position. So what happens to the galaxies inside the supergalaxy as they form? They form into a geometric pattern that scientists call the egg carton universe. Wait till you see this stuff. This is a kind of difficult diagram to really make out very much from. But you notice that there is a series of approximately 4 or 5 squares in it. And the geometry, if you look carefully, you can see that these blobs kind of are hugging the geometry. In fact, they're hugging it very well. That's no good, though. The one that really, really rocked me, and I saw this back in like 99 or 2000, was this. This is our local neighborhood, folks. What's that in the middle? You see where it says sun up at the top? And then there's an arrow that goes into the middle between the two octahedrons. That's a gigantic blob of millions and trillion, well, billion, I don't know how many. I don't freaking know, but it's a lot. Millions of galaxies. It's called a galactic supercluster. So we're talking about absolutely vast-sized areas. And what you're seeing here is a series of squiggly lines or blobs that correspond to where the galaxies congregate. These are galaxies. I'm talking about gigantic amounts of millions of galaxies for each blob. So if you look at this, this is a blob that is filled with millions and millions and millions, if not more, of galaxies. And they line up. They look at the corners, right? Look at the top, the bottom, each of the corners of each octahedron. There's a blob with all these galaxies hanging out there. And notice that along the lines, especially in the middle, that there's galaxies that form along the lines. So this is showing you that the universe has fractalized out of that original photon. I don't know anybody else that's ever put this together besides me, which is pretty freaking cool. Thank you. I had a stodgy old grandfather who was a PhD engineer. And long before I'd even made it this far, I was telling him some of my physics breakthroughs, and he said, "Well, David, if what you find out is actually true, then it's worthy of a Nobel Prize." And that was like the best compliment he ever paid me in my life, because he was not into any of the stuff that I'm doing at all. But, you know, you're not going to get a Nobel Prize for this stuff, because it integrates too many things, and they don't want this to break out into the mainstream, right? They want to keep this occult. They don't want you to know this stuff. So then the other thing that's weird is that it actually stacks up 3 high throughout the universe. For some weird reason, the super galaxy is made of stacks of octahedrons that go 3 high, and then the one that we're in is at the bottom. We're in the middle. So here's a map of what the 3 high octahedrons look like when you see them in larger groups, and because there's tons of these that make up the supergalaxy, that's why they call it the egg carton universe. Okay? Because in the areas between where the geometry is, those are called voids. There are no galaxies because it's all vibrating, and the vibration is geometric. So the galaxies can only form where the vibration allows them to go. Now, the circle makers, we had Patty Greer on the panel last night talking about crop circles, right? And that was pretty cool. Yeah, a lot of you guys were there. And I wanted her on the panel to help set this up today because we were asking, is there a message in the crop circles? Okay. Some of the sacred geometry, and a lot of the sacred geometry that I'm talking about shows up in the crop circles. So this, for example, is the fractalizing octahedron that made the universe. That's what I believe it is. It's showing how it's fractalizing out. And then I remember at one point, I'm trying to think about the idea of all these octahedrons forming a big giant galaxy, and what would that actually look like? And I'm thinking, I want to draw this. I want to commission an artist to draw the supergalaxy made out of octahedrons. And I'm trying to visualize this in my head, and I'm thinking about it, and it didn't even take 30 seconds. And I went, oh my God, there's a crop circle that already drew it. Right there. How the hell did that thing form in a bunch of wheat? Oh yeah, it's an army of hedgehogs running round and round. 2 drunk chaps named Doug and Dave came over with a few pints in the bellies and got a funny cap, a string, and a board. Starting to turn into Monty Python now, right? This is an X-parrot. That's an inside joke if you know Monty Python. I could still fight you, honestly. Huh? Oh, my God. Now I want to downshift. I want to downshift to galaxies and again blow your mind. And this is another thing that I've been holding on to that I've only publicly released starting at the last expo. I didn't know when I was going to release this, but the time became right. So, what we usually see for a galaxy diagram is this idealized version of the Milky Way. This is not real. This is a fabrication based on existing kind of how it looks and very elaborate art, but notice that it's very spiraling. It's very circular. And then, of course, it says there, all the stars you can see in the sky fit into that tiny little red circle at the bottom. So all the rest is outside of our visible range. That's how big this thing is. Well, is there any proof? Is there any really tangible, undeniable, obvious, smack you in the face with a 2x4 plank kind of proof, bang, that shows that there's something going on with certain galaxies, at least, if not all of them, and I believe it's all of them, in which geometry is controlling them, that they're actually geometric, so that resonance of that original photon is actually affecting them. What you're about to see is a nebula. Now, a nebula is sort of like a galaxy. It's an emitter or a cloud of gas, and the gas is very colorful. Well, wait a minute. What about this nebula right here? Does this look normal to you? It's going to turn. Bang. That is HD 44179. And you can see there is an emitter in the middle. And the gases, the dust that's coming out, are precisely organized into a geometric pattern. And remember, this is not flat. It's not flat. So what are we actually looking at? We're looking at octahedrons. This is actually, it's like a big giant cube. But there's 2 octahedrons in there, and you're seeing the sides of them. So those octahedral energy fields actually are exerting pressure, gravitational pressure. There is a cubical or octahedron gravity field that is containing that dust in a structure, just like the gravity contains those galaxies in the egg carton structure, the super galaxies. There's another one. Now, if you only found one of these, it's crazy enough, but they found 2 of them so far. That's just the ones I've been able to see. This, again, would be a cube in space. It is not flat. Now I want to go through and show you some galaxies, and when you start looking at the way they actually look, you realize, wait a freaking minute. We have been lied to. There is a very intrinsic aspect of science that is being overlooked. So let's check out M61. You don't have to look at that very long, or just if you want to cheat, go and look at the top left in the headline. Galactic hexagon. You take a look at that and tell me that you don't see that there's a hexagon hanging out in the middle, that there is some kind of geometry that is holding those galactic spiral arms in place in a shape pattern, a geometric pattern. Hardly anybody has ever talked about this, and even this galactic hexagon article only used M61. They didn't realize that it was actually working on many, many other galaxies. Another one that is amazing is NGC 1232. Look at that. You see pentagons. So galaxies are not curving. And you can see geometry within geometry. If you look carefully, you can see it's not just one level. It goes in, it ratchets in. Now let's turn this, first of all, we're going to flip it over to the other side, like that. Then we're going to tilt it 90 degrees clockwise, and we get this. Now this is an X-ray diagram, and this is very, very important. Most of the time, when the astronomers really want to know what a galaxy looks like, they have to use this type of shape, this type of illustration. What are we seeing? If you go back to the previous illustration for a moment, let me do that. A lot of what you're seeing here is not stars. You're seeing reflected light that's coming off of dust. So you don't actually get to see visually where all the stars are. The light can glow brightly enough that the actual locations, the positions of the stars, can get screwed up. The glow is kind of overshadowing that stuff. So you need to see an X-ray diagram in order to find the geometry. Well, check this out. All you got to do is start drawing some lines in here, and you can very easily see the pentagonal geometry. So let me back it up again, just so now you know what I'm showing you. You can exactly see where that sucker was as it comes back in. And there's others as well that are easily seeable. So this is kind of unfortunate, but what it means is that this type of X-ray diagram, this boring black and white diagram, is what we need to look at in order to actually find the geometry of the galaxies. If you don't see it this way, the photograph alone is not going to show it to you. So the images that I'm pulling from now are from this, which is called the Revised Shapley-Ames Catalog. And it just goes through all the different types of galaxies that are out there. Now this is a very nice, organized collection of all the different types of galaxies that are out there. And I went through all of them one by one. I looked at every single picture on this website. And I found that approximately 85 to 90% of them had geometric features. And the others were just kind of too indistinct to really make it out, but that doesn't mean it's not there. If 85 to 90% of them show geometry, and I'm only going to show you some of the best, then we have a new law of nature that nobody is telling us about. So here's NGC 3646. The visible light photo shows a very clear hexagonal pattern there, but when you look at it in the X-ray, it's even more obvious. You can see a sharp, straight line. You can see the hexagon. And that one, where they tighten it up even more into the blue range of the X-rays, they break it down into spectrums as well. You can see it even more. And there's the dust configuration. The dust actually shows it in this case very nicely as well. And there's many, 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 many galaxies that I can do this with, but because we only have 3 hours, I'm not going to do a whole lot of them. If you haven't already figured this out, if you've seen my stuff before, all of this science that I'm showing you can be explained by what they call cymatics. Cymatics is the study by Dr. Hans Jenny, that's how you pronounce that name, even though it looks like Jenny, the J is silent, it's like a Y. So Dr. Hans Jenny studied a drop of water, and he put particles in the water, and it's normally going to just look like milk. There's nothing distinct in the water. Now, when he vibrated the water at certain pure sound frequencies, oh my God. Now, most of you guys have already seen this, so I'm not getting the orgasmic gasping that I normally would expect to have. Okay, don't actually do it. That was only a joke. Check it out. You have a fluid, you have particles in the fluid, and you get the Merkaba. Oh, now everybody's going to try to flood the bathroom at the same time. Oh, I know this part. Fuck David. I got to piss, dude. Hey, look, it's not my fault. They made me have a 3-hour talk, and I can't have the time to have a break in the middle, so there you go. We're just going to blaze on through this thing. So, let's keep going. As you change the vibration, the geometry changes as well. You play a different sound into the water. That's all this is a drop of water with sand in it. You change the sound, you get different types of geometry that form. Just exactly like how I showed you that the different Platonic solids, those different geometries that the universe is built from, change their form as the frequency changes. There's the proof. Well, guess what? These little guys, this fluid vibration, is exactly what the galaxies are doing on the supergalactic level. The whole freaking universe is structured this way, which shows that ultimately this one Merkaba form, the original photon, the universe itself is like a fluid. It's like a fluid. There's some kind of fluid-like energy out there. And as the Merkaba vibrates and it fractalizes, it's actually fractalizing as a vibration, a fluid-like vibration. And then when you change the frequency, you get different geometry. In fact, here we have a list of 9 different shapes, all from the same drop of water, all with the same sand inside, and they form stable patterns that do not change the way they look unless you change the frequency. We don't actually, I mean, you could probably go back to the original video and listen to the frequency that created the Merkaba. I don't know. But it would also be a function of the size and the volume of the drop of water and how spherical it really is. There was another guy, and that was Dr. Buckminster Fuller, who took a spherical balloon and dipped it in dye and then vibrated the balloon at different sound frequencies, and he could get any of the Platonic solids to form over the balloon, because that's where the dye would be able to collect, is along the geometry where it's vibrating. And, you know, because it's like the vibrations, this is like if you think about a guitar string, you ever pluck a guitar string, you look at it, and there will be these little areas called nodes where the string doesn't move up and down, it just stays in one place. Each of these corners are vibrational nodes. Those are the areas where the vibration is not moving as much. And so what happens is there's all these little sand particles inside these shapes, and they're on the go. They're moving all through the whole structure. They don't just sit there. But the form stays consistent. So in terms of the universe, we have these universal geometric fields which are holding the galaxies in position, thus forming the egg carton. We have these fields holding the galactic arms in position, thus causing those weird geometric angles on the arms that I just showed you. Then when you take larger amounts of water, like we would have in the universe, the equivalent fluid medium of the universe, you take larger amounts, you put sand in that, and then you increase the frequency, you get multicellular structure. the same image keeps reiterating and reiterating, and then when you crank the frequency up, it changes to a different pattern, and notice once again you have that octahedron type of pattern, just like we saw with the galaxies. So this is essentially now advanced egghead physics that proves that the universe is a vibration of light that also has a sound quality. It's really amazing, because think about what this could mean if all the atoms on Earth are at one frequency now. What happens if the frequency increases? There could be some other level of reality that's around us right now that we don't have access to because we're not at the same vibration. And that is what we know, that there are cloaking systems run by the government and the various black ops programs that can, what they call mask. Most people call it cloaking. They actually call it masking, according to Pete Peterson. And they already have it for airplanes. They can mask out an airplane. You'll still hear it going through the air, but you won't see it. The photons just bend around it. Now, this goes directly down to the quantum level, and you've probably all seen me talk about this before. Some of you, this might be new, probably not very many. Does anybody not know who Dr. Robert Moon is? Raise your hand if you don't know. Oh, now wait a minute. Okay. That means you haven't all watched every episode of the show. That's good. This is in some of the older episodes. I'm glad that you don't know this already. That makes me feel good. Okay. So now I get to do my Dr. Robert Moon jokes. So anyway, this is one of the guys who worked on the original nuclear program. He worked on the original Manhattan Project that developed the nuclear bomb. So he certainly has credibility as a scientist. And he looks pretty freaking paranoid in this photo. And I would be too if I'd build a nuclear bomb. There might be some people who would decide the world would be better off without me. And apparently, if you want to be a genius scientist, A, you need to have a blackboard behind you with equations on it, and B, you need to grow your hair out like wavy gravy. And I'm pretty sure that's a pocket protector in his front pocket there. He's definitely got the college professor look for sure. Now, Dr. Robert Moon had come across to us as the scientist who developed the nuclear bomb, but then he had this tremendous scientific insight in 1987. And we are now getting some very, very much needed ventilation in the room. So give them a big round of applause, everybody. We've been freaking dying in here. This is awesome. The actual exterior temperature is better than the air conditioning. Go figure. On a day that was only like 115 degrees. All right. So, genius scientist who figured out how to make a nuclear bomb. In order to do that, you got to play around with subatomic particles. That means you got to understand how subatomic particles work. That means that he understands all of these different quantum laws about how atoms and molecules work and how they fit together and what do they do and what are the weird, strange laws. And he eventually discovered that there were all these strange things about atoms and molecules. There is also like a fire exit door back here. I don't know if you guys want to jack that one open as well. But maybe I'll get more dogs coming in. I'm not really sure at this point. They'll be very happy to be here. We'll see if they have anything intelligent to say. The people are taking back the power, folks. This is where it's happening, right here. So what he found out in 1987 was that there's all these weird little things about atoms that most of us don't even know. There's laws about how the atomic nucleus fits together. So that atomic nucleus is the key. The nucleus has protons and neutrons in the normal model. But the neutrons are only put in there because they think that they should be there. Because they think that the neutrons are needed to make the math work. Oh, we're kind of getting a little bit of glare. You guys, it's too bright? Okay, why don't we close that one? We got to at least save one side. Okay, that side isn't quite as bad. All right. There's warm air anyway, he said. Okay. It's anarchy. It's chaos. All right. We're just trying to figure this thing out. Okay, so anyway, 1987, he's looking at the atoms and molecules that make up the universe. He's studying their properties. He's looking for magic numbers. He's looking at the protons inside the nucleus. And he comes up with the idea that the nucleus of the atom is not just a big ball of protons, that the protons are in shells. And that as atoms increase in their size and atomic weight, that there are shells within shells that grow. So look at this. This is his geometric solution of the atomic nucleus. Wow, this is fun, huh? I'm just loving this whole thing. Somebody just wrapped their belt around it or something. If we have some gaffer tape, we could tape it together. Does anybody, any AV guys have some tape? All right, cool. It's working. So now what am I showing you here? This is gonna trip you out. And again, most of you don't know about this yet, which is really cool. That excites me. So, these are the layers of how protons appear inside the nucleus. These are protons. Now what the heck? Wait a minute. I was taught in school that a proton is a particle. No. In Dr. Robert Moon's model, the protons are just waves, and the waves are geometric. So each proton is a corner of a geometric object. So what's oxygen? Oxygen has 8 protons. So in Dr. Robert Moon's model, the oxygen is a cube sitting in the middle. The cube has 8 corners. Those are the 8 protons. So you are utterly dependent on oxygen to breathe, right? So as you inhale oxygen, you're inhaling all these little cubes. And the cube is a fractal of the image of the original photon of the universe. So your breath, the power of your breath, the shamanic spiritual energy that all these meditation practices, remember they want you to really breathe deeply, and then that's how you ascend. You're taking in sacred geometry. You're inhaling it into your lungs, and there's energy in there that's actually awakening your ascension. It's preparing you for the ascension. It's unbelievable that oxygen is the one thing that if we don't have it for even really like a blood choke to the brain, it's like 60 seconds and you're dead. Then we have, the next pattern after that is the octahedron, where you're adding now another 6 protons, and that brings you silicon. Anyway, I'm going to run you through the whole thing. It'll be easier to see if we do it one at a time. So the first element is the cube with the 8 corners, and again, this is only a vibration, and it's all a vibration of the original photon, making these atoms. 8 protons, oxygen. What's the number there, the percentage? That's the total number, the total percent of Earth's mass, the total weight of the Earth that is oxygen. So 62.55% of all the matter on Earth is oxygen. That's because matter wants to do this. Matter wants to go into the cube pattern because it's the home vibration. It's what feels good. So these elements are the most useful for life because it's a biological universe. That's why we need to breathe oxygen. Then we have the octahedron, the next layer. The octahedron shows up as silicon because silicon has 14 protons. And that's 21.2% of all the mass of the universe. Yeah, so now we've had another side effect, which is that it's actually gotten a lot hotter. And apparently the cooling effect that we found was just the motion of air-conditioned air as it was leaving the building. Good God. Fuck. Whatever. They're doing it next year in May. Let's just all give a big round of applause for that brilliant insight. Who would have thunk it? Wow, if May, it's not going to be as hot. Okay. There's other reasons why it was done in June this time, so it's all good. Anyway, let's go down the list. And we get to silicon next, 21.2% of all the mass of the Earth. Well, right there, we're up to 73.7. That's a lot. And those are the two home vibrations that matter wants to make. And a lot of things are made out of silicon. Silicon is a very, very important element for the building of skin and cells and proteins and all that stuff. Then the next one we have is the icosahedron, which adds up to 26 corners altogether, and that's iron. And iron is weird because it is magnetic. The magnetic property of iron is why this is so interesting. So then